In today's feature, we dive into one of the most dramatic economic turnarounds of 2025, Ghana's sudden comeback from the brink of economic collapse to securing a whopping $367 million from the International Monetary Fund. But beneath the numbers, celebrations, and headlines lies a critical question: what is the real cost of this rescue? Is this a rare African success story in the making? Or has Ghana simply exchanged one crisis for another under the polished guise of reform? Let's break it all down. Before jumping into Ghana's specific case, let's take a broader view. There's something many people overlook: African debt is denominated in US dollars. That means countries like Ghana must earn dollars, whether through exports or borrowing just to service that debt. But growing their own food and sustaining local industries doesn't bring in dollars. Worse, any move towards self-sufficiency often meets global resistance, sometimes violent or economic in nature. So, African countries are often caught in a vicious loop. They must keep their economies open to external influence, even if that delays local development, just to access dollars. Now, bring Ghana into that picture. Ghana's IMF re-entry. How did we get here? In July 2025, Ghana's top economic team entered the IMF's headquarters in Washington, D.C., facing enormous pressure. Just a few months earlier, the country's 36-month, $3 billion IMF-backed program was nearly in shambles. Ghana had originally been hailed as a shining example of African fiscal reform. But by the end of 2024, that narrative had crumbled. The pre-election year saw reckless spending, civil service bonuses, fuel subsidies, and fast-tracked infrastructure projects. These expenditures strained public finances far beyond agreed IMF thresholds. As Ghana moved closer to elections, the economic script flipped from recovery to relapse. By the fourth quarter of 2024, it was clear Ghana's economic health had spiraled. Debt levels swelled, arrears from unpaid government bills began piling up, and confidence in the country's debt restructuring waned. Credit rating agencies responded with downgrades. Investors fled. The Ghanaian cedi depreciated rapidly, and inflation began biting again. For the ordinary citizen, prices of basic goods skyrocketed while salaries and payments were delayed. Business owners who relied on government contracts started bleeding cash. This wasn't just an economic downturn. It was a full-blown crisis threatening to undo years of fiscal consolidation. Following the elections, a new government was sworn in, and with it came the most critical economic decisions in recent Ghanaian history. Unlike its predecessors, this administration didn't try to defend poor choices. Instead, they acknowledged mistakes and presented a sweeping corrective plan to the IMF. The 2025 budget introduced a primary surplus target of 1.5% of GDP, something Ghana hadn't achieved in years. Expenditure ceilings were introduced and tied directly to revenue. Public spending would now be strictly monitored. The IMF responded swiftly, greenlighting the release of $367 million. It wasn't just a financial release, it was a symbolic nod of confidence, not only to Ghana but to other African nations watching from the sidelines. Now, let's talk about the part that doesn't make headlines as often: the cost of this bailout. Behind the scenes, Ghana had to agree to a number of tough reforms, broadening the tax base, including strict property tax collection, scaling back or removing subsidies on fuel and electricity, instituting an independent audit of the 2024 arrears to check for legitimacy, wage freezes for public sector workers in the bustling markets of Accra and Kumasi. These policies hit hard. Transportation costs surged, food prices went up, small businesses faced stricter tax enforcement, strikes broke out, civil servants worried whether they'd be paid on time. For many Ghanaians, economic reform began to feel like economic punishment. Beyond economics, there's the emotional and psychological toll. Many Ghanaians began to question who was truly in charge of their country's finances. Was it their elected leaders or IMF technocrats in Washington? Public sentiment grew skeptical. Opposition parties seized on this unrest, accusing the government of surrendering national sovereignty. Social media exploded with hashtags like IMF must go and we can't breathe. Yes, the IMF was providing a lifeline, but at what cost? Was this debt rescue plan a roadmap to self-reliance, or a veiled mechanism for external control? Let's go back to that critical July 2025 meeting of the IMF's Executive Board. Why did they approve the bailout? Because, despite the earlier missteps, Ghana's new corrective measures were unusually candid. Few countries own up to pre-election fiscal recklessness. Even fewer take immediate action afterward. Ghana did both. The IMF saw this as an opportunity to send a broader message: we're willing to support reformers, even if they stumble, as long as they course correct. But this raised eyebrows. Was this a new era of flexibility or a dangerous precedent that might encourage other countries to overspend during elections, expecting to be bailed out later? Ghana's case is no longer just about Ghana. It's become a case study for countries like Kenya, Zambia, and Egypt, nations grappling with IMF-backed programs, domestic political pressures, and fragile economies. Across Africa, finance ministers and central bank governors are watching. Ghana's success or failure will influence how they handle their own reform programs. Can a government stay fiscally disciplined during election seasons? Or will democracy and politics always override economics? On paper, Ghana's credit rating is improving. Bond yields are stabilizing. Foreign investors are trickling back. But on the streets, the mood is less optimistic. Daily life is harder. Prices are higher. Salaries are frozen. Electricity is more expensive. And food is costing more than ever. These aren't just numbers, they're lived realities. Some argue these are short-term sacrifices for long-term gain. Others say it's history, repeating itself. External lenders rescuing governments while the people bear the cost. Ghana's path forward is still full of obstacles. 1. Debt restructuring talks with some private creditors are still ongoing. Delays could prevent Ghana from accessing future capital markets. 2. Revenue collection enforcement outside of urban areas remains weak. If the government can't broaden the tax base efficiently, its surplus targets may collapse. 3. Commodity volatility. Ghana's economy depends on cocoa and gold. If prices drop, revenue will suffer, jeopardizing the budget. 4. Political backlash. As more reforms roll out, public dissatisfaction could explode. Labor unions have already warned of action. 5. Election cycles. The next elections aren't far off. Can the government resist the temptation to spend wildly again? There are glimmers of hope. Investor confidence is creeping back. The IMF is standing by. The government, at least for now, appears committed to discipline. But history warns us. Many African economies have been here before, riding a wave of short-term fixes before plunging back into chaos. Ghana has bought itself time, but will it use it wisely? The difference this time lies in execution. Reform is easy to promise but painful to implement, and even harder to sustain. So, what do you think? Is Ghana outsmarting the IMF with a bold long-term plan? Or has it walked into another dependency trap dressed as reform? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget, this story isn't just about economics. It's about sovereignty, about the ability of African nations to chart their own course. If you want to see more videos like this exploring real issues behind the headlines, from African economics to Black civilization and global power structures, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell icon, and help amplify stories the mainstream often ignores. Thank you for watching. And until next time, stay bold, stay informed, and stay Black. If this story sparked something in you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories from across the world. Bye, Africa Lights.